Okay, picture this. June 22nd, 1963. It's a Saturday, West Side Chicago. Seems like just another day, right?
Right. For most people, yeah.
But for one family, and really for their whole block, it was. It was a huge turning point. And this one moment, it's caught in this simple diary entry. It just opens up this massive window onto, well, some really turbulent times in America.
Absolutely. A small event with huge ripples.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we sift through stacks of research, articles, notes, you name it, and pull out the key insights for you.
We try to connect the dots.
Exactly. And today, we're diving deep into 1960s Chicago. Specifically, the really complex racial shifts happening then and how they tie into the bigger civil rights movement that was just shaking the whole country.
Yeah, it's impossible to separate the local from the national picture back then.
Our goal here is to, really unpack what was actually going on with neighborhood change, get past the surface stuff, the initial reactions, and uncover the systems underneath.
The hidden stuff that often drives things.
So the big question we want to tackle with you is, why were white residents in places like this Chicago neighborhood so genuinely frightened when a black family moved in?
Mm-hmm.
What was behind that fear? And maybe more importantly, what was the real reason neighborhoods sometimes declined? Because, as we're going to see, it's way more complicated and honestly pretty surprising compared to what people thought at the time.
Yeah, the common narratives often miss the mark.
So let's start right there with that diary entry. It's from a woman named Lillian Gartz, dated June 22nd, 1963. She writes, and I'm quoting here, "Well, the mystery of who bought the young Parker house has been solved. As more or less expected, the colored moved in today, 6/22/63.
Wow. Just states it like that, as more or less expected.
Exactly. Simple words, but they mark the start of this huge change on one single block in West Side Chicago. You can feel the anticipation, almost like this was something people were waiting for, maybe bracing for.
And what's really fascinating, like you said, is putting this very personal, very local thing, one family, one house, against the backdrop of what was happening nationally. June 1963.
Yeah, tell us about that context.
Well, June 63 was absolutely peak civil rights movement time. I mean, clashes between white segregationists and black activists, protesters.
Yeah.
It was literally daily news all over the country.
Right.
So this small event in Chicago, it wasn't happening in a vacuum. It was totally part of this much bigger, much more intense national storm.
And that storm, the spring of 1963 was incredibly violent for African Americans fighting for their rights. We have to remember that.
Definitely.
Just think about the Birmingham campaign in Alabama. Those protests, peaceful protests against Jim Crow laws, segregation, discrimination.
That with unbelievable force.
Unbelievable is the word. Eugene Bullconnor, the Commissioner of Public Safety, and you got to sort of pause at that title.
Yeah, the irony.
He unleashed absolute brutality.
The images from Birmingham, they're unforgettable.
They really are. They went everywhere, didn't they? National TV, international news, high-powered fire hoses, just blasting teenage protesters, literally sending them tumbling down the street.
Dogs attacking people.
Yes, and the beatings of unarmed black folks, police batons, and then seeing kids, actual children, getting thrown into paddy wagons.
Still singing, though.
Still singing their protest songs, that defiance, that courage. It's just staggering to think about. These weren't like hidden things. They were public spectacles of injustice. You couldn't look away.
So you have that intense heat coming out of Birmingham. What else was happening right around that same time, June 63, that ramped things up even more?
Well, there was Governor George Wallace in Alabama.
Wallace, yeah. He'd already made that infamous speech, right? Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever.
That was him. And in June 63, he physically stood in the doorway at the University of Alabama, literally blocked the entrance.
To stop black students from enrolling. Vivian Malone and James Hood.
Exactly. It was this huge standoff. President Kennedy actually had to step in.
Sent in federal troops, right?
He did. Federalized the Alabama National Guard to force Wallace to step aside and let those students register. A major confrontation.
And Kennedy addressed the nation right after that, didn't he?
That same night, June 11th, he went on TV, called the whole country to task, basically, said treating black citizens fairly wasn't just law, it was a moral issue. A really powerful moment.
But the response...
Yeah.
It was immediate and horrifying.
And the very next day, June 12th.
Medgar, the NAACP field secretary in Mississippi, a huge figure in the movement there.
Down in his own driveway.
In front of his wife and kids. Just assassinated. It was like this brutal, chilling answer to Kennedy's plea and to everything else that was happening.
So you put all that together, Birmingham's violence, Wallace's defiance, Kennedy's call for morality, Evers' murder.
It's this incredibly dramatic, violent, tense national backdrop, and that is exactly the context, the lead-up to that one African-American family moving on to Lillian Gartz's block in Chicago.
It really shows how these things were connected. What happened nationally absolutely shaped local feelings, local events.
No question.
Which brings us back to that core puzzle. Despite all this national violence directed at African Americans,
Yeah.
the source material makes this really striking point. Yet, it was the whites who were frightened in my neighborhood by the arrival of this African American family.
Seems counterintuitive on the surface.
It does. So we have to ask you, the listener, to think about this. Why? Why the fear? Why did white residents in so many Chicago neighborhoods react with such fear, sometimes even violence, like riots, when black families moved in nearby?
What was the stated reason, usually?
Well, the fear you heard expressed over and over was about property values and neighborhood decline. There's a quote from a white protester back in 1953 in another Chicago neighborhood, South Deering. He said, "Every place they've taken over, they've turned into a slum."
Okay. So that was the perception. The fear was that black residents moving in automatically meant the neighborhood would go downhill.
That was the dominant narrative, absolutely. Lower property values, blight, everything
Got it.
falling apart.
Was that actually true? Was that the cause?
Well, this is where our source material really challenges that whole idea.
Yeah.
It says pretty directly that the real culprit was the racist lending policies, causing neighborhood deterioration after blacks entered.
Okay. So it wasn't the people moving in, but the policies already in place or put in place, policies that were hidden.
Exactly. It flips the script. The deterioration wasn't caused by black families, but by these discriminatory systems that kicked in, often invisibly. Which leads to the next question, right? What were these policies? How did they actually work?
Let's unpack that, because if it's not the people, it's the system. We need to understand the system.
Okay, so the key term here, the one that unlocks a lot of this, is redlining. Have you heard that term?
Yes, though maybe not everyone listening has. It's crucial.
It really is. It started way back in the 1930s, during the Depression. The government created agencies like the FHA, Federal Housing Administration, and the HOLC, Homeowners Loan Corporation. The idea was to help stabilize the housing market, make mortgages more available.
Sounds good on the surface, yeah. Help people own homes.
But, and this is a huge but, these same agencies created this system for rating neighborhoods. And that system was deeply, deeply biased from the start.
Based on race and ethnicity, essentially.
Pretty much. They made these color-coded maps. Neighborhoods got grades, A, B, C, D. A, neighborhoods were the best, outlined in green. Considered totally safe for mortgage lending. Usually these were newer, white, affluent areas.
Okay, green means go for loans.
Right. Then you had the D neighborhoods. These were outlined in red, hence redlined. And in these areas, which were often older, black communities, or sometimes immigrant neighborhoods, forget about it. Virtually no mortgages, no standard home loans were available, period.
So the government itself was basically drawing lines on a map saying, don't invest here, largely based on who lived there.
That's exactly what it was. A government-sanctioned denial of credit, starving these communities of the capital needed to buy, sell, or even just maintain homes.
And the impact on black families? I mean, you can imagine, it was devastating.
Totally. First, they couldn't get loans to buy homes in those green or even blue B-rated areas. They were locked out.
Right. Segregated by finance.
And even if they managed to buy in or already lived in the red-lined areas, they couldn't get loans for repairs, for upkeep, for improvements. Nothing.
So houses inevitably fall into disrepair if you can't get loans to fix them.
Exactly. And often, because their options were so limited, they ended up having to overpay for houses that were already run down just to get a foothold somewhere.
It's a trap. You can't build wealth through homeownership, which is, the main way most American families build wealth.
Precisely. It systematically blocked black families from building generational wealth and forced them into deteriorating housing stock they couldn't even get loans to fix. A vicious cycle.
But it wasn't just black families who were hurt by this, right? What about the white homeowners in areas that were starting to integrate or were maybe near a red line zone?
That's a really important, often overlooked part of the story. Redlining trapped white homeowners, too. Once an area got that D rating or even started to look like it might get downgraded.
Banks would pull back lending there, too.
You got it. So a white family wanting to sell couldn't find buyers who could get a normal mortgage. Their pool of potential buyers just vanished.
So their property value starts to tank.
Right. And who steps into that vacuum? Often, it was unscrupulous real estate speculators, blockbusters. They'd prey on the white homeowners' fears.
Stirring up panic, basically. Sell now before it's worthless.
Exactly that. They'd buy the houses way under market value from these panicked white sellers.
Okay, so they buy low from white families. Then what?
Then they turn around and sell those same houses to black families who couldn't get traditional mortgages anywhere else, but they sold them on contract.
Ah, contract selling. That sounds ominous.
It was deeply predatory. Contract selling meant the black family made payments, often really high payments, maybe higher than a mortgage would have been.
But they didn't actually own the house.
Not until the very last payment was made. They didn't build any equity. And here's the cruelest part. If they missed even one payment, maybe someone got sick, lost a job, anything, the seller could evict them immediately.
And they'd lose the house and all the money they'd already paid in.
Everything. All gone. No legal recourse. It was designed to strip wealth, not build it. These speculators often sold the same house over and over again on contract.
That's just incredibly exploitative. So the agents profit immensely, the white sellers lose value, and the black buyers are trapped in this impossible situation.
It was a system perfectly designed to extract wealth and destabilize communities.
And the key thing, tying back to the fear, most white residents likely had no idea this whole machinery of redlining and contract selling was even operating.
Exactly. The source mentions the author's own parents probably never even heard the word redlining. They didn't understand the concept, the deliberate policy decisions.
So they just saw the surface effects, neighbors moving out, maybe some properties looking run down because no one could get loans to fix them.
And they attributed it to the wrong cause. They saw black families moving in, and they saw a decline starting, and they connected those two things directly in their minds.
When the real cause was this invisible, systemic financial discrimination pulling the strings behind the scenes.
Right. That lack of understanding, that hidden nature of the system, is what allowed the fear and prejudice to fester and seem justified to the people experiencing it.
It turned neighbors against neighbors, essentially.
So if you think about white flight now through this lens, it makes more sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it wasn't just irrational panic, maybe? Or not only that.
When black families started moving in and white homeowners saw their property values starting to drop because of redlining, because banks wouldn't lend as they wanted out. They wanted to sell fast to get as much for their property as they could before the offered price continued to plummet.
It was an economic escape hatch driven by these policies they didn't even understand. A self-fulfilling prophecy, almost. Redlining devalues the neighborhood. People flee the devaluation, which further devalues the neighborhood.
Exactly. A downward spiral engineered by policy, not by people.
And you mentioned this wasn't just Chicago, right? This was happening elsewhere.
Oh, yeah. Our source confirms this played out in large cities all across America. Detroit, Cleveland, Philadelphia, St. Louis. Same basic pattern. Redlining, blockbusting, contract selling, fear, flight, decline.
A national phenomenon with devastating local consequences.
Absolutely. The impact on individual lives, like the author's parents mentioned in the source, was huge. It changed my parents' lives in ways they never could have predicted. Their whole world, their community, their financial future, altered by forces they couldn't see.
So let's just circle back and make sure we land this point clearly, because it's so important.
Please do.
The deterioration seen in many urban neighborhoods wasn't the fault of the black families moving in. That's the critical takeaway.
Right.
It was caused by these systemic, discriminatory housing policies, redlining primarily, and predatory practices like contract selling that deliberately starved communities of investment, exploited both white and black residents in different ways, and basically set the stage for decline.
It forces us to rethink who, or rather what, we blame for historical changes in our cities.
Exactly. It shifts the focus from individual actions or group characteristics to the underlying structures of inequality.
So, looking back at our deep dive today,
Yeah.
we started with that one diary entry, June 1963, one family moving in.
And it took us all the way to the national stage of the civil rights movement, Birmingham, Wallace, Medgar Evers.
And then deep into the weeds of economic policy, uncovering these hidden systems like redlining and contract selling.
Connecting the personal fear on that Chicago block to the vast impersonal machinery of discriminatory finance.
And the crucial takeaway, the thing we really hope you take from this, is that the real driver of neighborhood decline in places like 1960s Westside Chicago and so many other American cities wasn't the people.
It was the policy.
It was the discriminatory housing policies. Policies that choked off investment, that bred fear and misunderstanding, and that actively undermined the economic health of entire communities. It was a system rigged against certain groups, and its effects rippled out to touch everyone.
Leaving a legacy we still grapple with today.
Definitely. Which brings us to our final thought for you.
What stands out to you about how these hidden policies shaped the visible realities in our cities? Realities that you might still see around you today. Think about those lasting echoes in wealth gaps, in neighborhood resources, even just the physical layout of some areas. How much of what we see now is rooted in these systems we've talked about? It really makes you think about cause and effect and how history continues to shape our present.